Good morning. It's or afternoon or evening, whatever time it is that you're watching this. I'm here with Rick Miller, a very close friend. He's president of Sensible Financial Planning, and he's agreed to come on to Economics Matters, the podcast, and tell us about his great career and which has led to his establishing many years now ago, Sensible Financial Planning, which is a financial planning advisory firm in Waltham, Mass, which does economics-based financial planning. And I have to say, I'm very proud that that Rick uses my company's MaxiFi Planner software with his clients. But let me just give you a kind of brief overview of Rick. I think he's one of the top financial advisors in the country, and that's why I wanted everybody to hear from him and get his perspective on the issue of personal financial planning and why it's so difficult for some people, or other people, whether he finds people that come to him, which is a very select group, obviously, a bias sample, as we would say in economics, whether they are in terrible shape, in great shape, just need reassurance, follow advice, all these kinds of interesting questions about the kind of behavior of people that confront financial planning problems. And these are the ones who are kind of most motivated either by fear or just want to get reassurance. But Rick started out his career as a young kid, deciding to go to the University of Chicago for his BA, and then he decided to go to the University of Chicago for his PhD in economics. And we're going to ask in a second, he's going to tell us in a second why he ended up going to the same place for both degrees, whether he's in love with Chicago. I think I'm going to have you ask you, Rick, something I don't know, which is where you started out in terms of where you were born and
oh my, going way back.
Go way back, yeah. And how you made because a lot of younger people get to watch the show, watch this, and they, the career paths of people, of professionals. Nobody thinks they can ever be successful in life, but everybody can be if they just kind of keep applying themselves. That's one of the messages, and that life has got lots of twists and turns, and lots of breaks, and that people that do well, usually it's attributable to a huge amount of luck, but that luck is there for everybody. It's not just available for some people. Everybody gets luck if you're put yourself in a position to get the luck to hit you. So anyway, and then after Rick graduated, he went to teach at Johns Hopkins in economics for a number of years. Then he was a management consultant. And then he worked for Scudder Investment for a number of years. And then he decided to go out on his own and set up his own advisory. And at that point, he showed up in my office to talk to me about our download program at the time, which was called ES Planner Download, about going in a different direction in financial planning than the industry in terms of using economics-based financial planning methodology, which if you're an economist, you're basically forced to do it the right way, and you have no other option. So, and we had and still have the only economics-based financial planning tool. Let me stop, Rick. Start us off with where you were born.
Well, so I was born in Indiana, in Indianapolis. My father was an accountant, and he worked for a company that had factories all over the country. And we moved practically every year. It was the time when IBM stood for I've been moved. My father didn't work for IBM, but he worked for a similar company, and he was the plant accountant at various plants around the country. So we moved every year as he changed jobs, and then we ended up in Pittsburgh, which was the headquarters of the company, and I did all my schooling there, and I ended up at the University of Chicago for undergraduate work. And my sophomore year, I took an economics course. I had planned to be a math major. I took an economics course, and at the end of that, a guy named Jim Heckman who was the head of the undergraduate program at Chicago. And Jim, now people know as a Nobel Prize winner, but at that point he was a young professor. And he called me into his office and he said, we in the economics department think that you should do graduate work. And I was struck by that and flattered by that. And so I was a little less flattered when I learned that he said the same thing to 10 other people in my class of 90. So I was in the top 11% or something like that. So I started graduate work my junior year, and I took the core exam, what was called the core exam. I guess it would be a prelim at the end of my senior year, and got into passed into the graduate program. I was taking graduate work, but I got I was eligible at that point for a master's.
So you're doing a PhD work as an undergraduate?
As a junior, I started with graduate courses as a junior, and I took.
This is
Gary.
Let me just pause and say, wow, because the University of Chicago's economics department, especially at the time you're talking about, was so tough on everybody.
I was so fortunate to be there. I took Gary Becker's price theory course.
Yeah,
Gary was another Nobel Prize winner. I took his price theory course as a senior in college, so I was it was an extraordinary time to be there, as you say.
But it was an incredibly rigorous place, and it was also like a pressure cooker of enormous.
But I didn't know any better.
You didn't know any better.
I didn't know any better.
I mean, a typical seminar in Chicago, because I, gave some at the time, would be you get there, and usually in every other place, you get to present your paper, and then after an hour and 20 minutes, there are some polite questions. Here, you have actually about 30 seconds to introduce the title, and then somebody starts screaming at you.
Well, it wasn't like that.
Stupid.
So I can say a little bit more about it. So I was in the seminar that Gary Becker led, and I can't remember now the name of the seminar, but the paper would come out. The paper of the person who was presenting would come out the week before, and all the graduate students would get the paper, and you'd read the paper, and all the graduate students would read the paper. And the seminar table was oval, and Gary and all the faculty would sit at the table. It was a large oval table, and then the graduate students would sit on chairs around the back. And if there were empty seats at the table, an ambitious graduate student would sit at the table with the faculty. And so the presenter would come and sit next to Gary, and Gary would say, "Welcome, Larry. Glad you could join us. Larry's going to talk about his paper on the economics of financial planning, let's say. Thanks for coming, Larry. Anything you'd like to say?" And Larry would say, "I'm really glad to be here." And Gary would say, "So great to have you. Page 1."
People need to realize that no other place in the country or the world did this. This was where people actually read every single sentence in advance. And if you didn't have every single sentence in your brain memorized, Gary Becker or Bob Lucas or Jim Heckman would say, "You're asking a stupid question." The audience. So the audience was more afraid than the speaker, actually, so this was why this was.
But the graduate students, each graduate student would have like 5 sentences in the whole paper marked, and they'd wait. Right. For the leader of the seminar to get to the page that they were on, they had a comment, and then they jump in with their comment, right? And as Larry, as you're saying, if the comment was not on point, Gary or whoever was leading the seminar would stop you and move on to the next comment.
But there were, Gary was very polite, but there were a lot of very impolite people at Chicago. Hopefully they're still there now. There's some now. But there were people. I remember giving a talk in Lucas's seminar where he got just irritated by one of the other faculty who were asking a question. And he said, That's a stupid question. Let's move on. That was good. And Bob
So
Lucas was a very polite guy, a lovely, is a very polite, lovely guy. That was unusual to hear from Lucas, if I'm recalling
okay.
correctly. Yeah.
So we'll spend the whole. We don't want to spend the whole time talking about that. But
Right.
it was an extraordinary time to be there, and I was fortunate to know a little bit. Bob Lucas and Tom Sargent was there for a year, and
Another Nobel Prize winner. Yeah.
Jim Heckman, and I was Gary Becker's teaching assistant, and I just had a fabulous time there.
Wow.
And then when I got my degree, I went to my PhD. I went to Johns Hopkins, and taught for 3 years, and I was not an effective researcher, and I now chalk that up to not really. I think I started too early, and I didn't really have a focus, an area that I was really interested in, and it was difficult to progress if you didn't have that.
Let me just ask you quick, did you get nervous in your early days when you're trying to write papers? And
Sure.
Hopkins?
Sure.
Do you think you freaked yourself out or psyched
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, I did. But we don't want to let another subject for another time. Because we'll be on
The
this.
idea is, I mean, giving, that everybody you could be super successful and then and you seem like you've got everything under control, and then you can still get very anxious, especially at a young age. Young people do, and the anxiety part of their brain doesn't let the other part of their brain just do its thing. I think that's something young people should be aware of, that they have to just kind of let themselves do their thing and not freak themselves out, because part of their brain just wants to be by themselves and do it and work. And I found this too when I was in your shoes and kind of barely got through to the point where I got some publications and made it through. But I was also in the same boat, always thinking, am I going to be able to cut it?
Right. And is it right? And I think, I think that had I, who knows, that it doesn't really matter. I didn't do it. And I left, when I left Hopkins, I was looking for something that I could do that was in business and relatively academically oriented. And the two choices seemed to be either investment banking or consulting. And I had a good friend who'd been to business school, and I asked him, and that's what he said. And so I talked to investment banking firms and I talked to consulting firms, and I really didn't like investment banking. It was all about, can we do a transaction? And that wasn't interesting to me. Management consulting seemed like solving problems, and that sounded interesting to me. And it was. I did that for 15 years, and I worked in every industry you can imagine. I worked in meatpacking and cement and airlines, but I did a lot of work also in financial services, credit cards and insurance and banking. And at the end of the time I did consulting, I was gravitating towards financial services, and I ended up working, when I left consulting, I ended up working at Scudder, which was a mutual fund company.
So tell us, unlike meatpacking, what was the particular assignment?
Well, the assignment was all about that it was a small meat packer based in Ohio, and I did some reading about the history of meatpacking and how meatpacking had really become a business when there was ice and railroads, right? So you could move meat. You could move meat instead of moving it on the hoof. You could move packed meat, and so it started out being a business in Cincinnati. That was the first area, and then as the railroads got better, the meat packing was able to move closer to the areas where it was really efficient to raise cattle and to raise hogs, right? And so it moved west, and so it moved to Chicago and Kansas City, but this meat packer was still in Ohio, and so the question was, well, what can they do, right? That was the subject.
Whether the meat packer should move closer to the
and
beef.
but it was more general. Did they they had a number of plants. Should they continue to have that number of plants or not? And that kind of question. It's a long time ago now, Larry. I don't remember really well. I do remember that I went into a meatpacking plant so that I could experience the sort of the basics of the business. And I spent a day in a meatpacking plant. So
they take you out for steaks?
They did take us out for steaks. They did. So yeah. So that was one that I worked in. But in financial service and credit cards, we worked on different attributes of credit cards, and that was a very interesting project. What kinds of things consumers wanted in credit cards, and how this particular company could expand its market share.
I see. So then, okay, so now you're working for Scudder as
Right.
funds. What did you do there?
I did internal consulting. They had all kinds of projects, things that they wanted to work on. The one that was, I think the largest, was that they had two mutual fund companies. And this kind of leads into how I got to do what I do now. Their biggest customer was AARP, and they had a whole family of mutual funds that was the AARP mutual funds. And then they had the Scudder funds. And the fund families lined up just like this. For every fund in the Scudder family, there was a fund in the AARP family. And they were identical objectives, identical fund managers. The portfolio manager was the same, but they had different boards, and they put out different annual reports, different prospectuses, and so forth. So the guy I was working for at the time had the good idea of putting them together, and the families together, and basically taking two funds and making them one.
So just for anybody who might not have any knowledge of a mutual fund would be holding, if you and I and the listeners are putting money into this fund, we hand them, the manager of the fund, our money. We get back shares of the fund, and then we're equity owners or stockholders of the fund. We're the owners of the fund, and then the manager takes the money and goes buy securities like stocks and bonds, and could be real estate type securities, and that's a mutual fund.
That's correct.
Invest in all kinds of. We have 7,000 equity finance mutual funds in our country right now, more than banks. We only have about 4,300 commercial banks anymore.
And I think there may be more mutual funds than there are stocks.
Yeah, actually,
there are more mutual funds than there are public companies.
Yeah, which is
right.
And that means that there are a lot of mutual fund managers, and that they all think that their combination of the stocks can somehow beat the overall combination, which is
yes, that's right. And at any rate, I got involved in that project of combining the two mutual fund companies, and I put together a project plan to combine the two mutual fund companies, which was more complicated than it might at first appear. But at the end of that, I ended up being Scudder's liaison with AARP.
Mm-hmm.
And AARP became interested in offering financial and investment advice to its members. And Scudder decided that it would fund a project to advise AARP on how to do that. And I led that project. And actually, Larry, you and I met during that project because I was trying to figure out how Scudder could be in the business of offering financial advice to AARP members, because AARP doesn't do anything. It's a marketing organization, and it's a membership organization that has, I guess I would say, I'm going to get in trouble here if I'm not careful. So let's just say that I believe it endorses a number of products and services, and it endorsed Scudder funds, and it was going to endorse, and I'm probably going to get the language wrong here too, but there are AARP sponsored or introduced Medicare supplemental insurance, for example, and other services of that kind. And the Scudder mutual funds were a service of that kind. And at any rate, I put together this plan for how Scudder could support AARP by providing financial advisory services to its members. And one of the components of that was going to be financial planning, and ES Planner was one of the pieces of software that we considered to use for that.
That was our early download version of MaxiFiPlanner.com. Yeah.
Right. And Scudder then decided that it would not provide that service for AARP, even though AARP was interested. There were a lot of complexities going on at Scudder at that time that made it inadvisable for Scudder to do that. And Scudder was in the process of moving from ownership by the Zurich to ownership by Deutsche Bank. Scudder was sold to Deutsche Bank. And I had thought that I was going to lead this business of offering financial advisory services to AARP members, and that just didn't happen. And I decided that I didn't want to, I guess I would say I decided that I wanted to take that idea and see if I could actually make a business out of it. And I talked to my boss at Scudder and said that was what I wanted to do, and he said that was fine. I don't remember whether he went on to Deutsche Bank or not. I don't believe he did. But at any rate, I got official permission from Scudder to take the idea, and I went and started Sensible Financial.
So just to point out to everybody who's younger, this is kind of like luck in the sense that, you know, Rick has this great economics education. Then he doesn't have as much luck in that profession as he had wanted to have as an academic. Then he goes through this path of consulting, ends up consulting for this company Scudder, and then by accident, by luck, he ends up with this assignment. And then and then he puts two and two together and says, now I can start my own company. And of course, your own company is in many ways a safer bet than, may not seem so safe because a lot of small companies fail, but in some ways it's safer because you can't be fired. You can go grow.
Well, that's true. You can be fired in that, clients in this case could fire me, right? Right. But it is.
You can have a crappy boss who fires you.
That's true.
Or sexist boss or racist boss or whatever. Nasty boss. Yeah.
True.
A drunken boss. I mean, I've heard of all these types of bosses that people have experienced.
Let's be clear and say that all of my bosses were just fine.
Yeah, no, most bosses are terrific, but there are a segment,
right?
Which is but anyway, so you start Sensible Financial Planning in what year?
Right. 2002.
And it's, by the way, it's sensiblefinancialplanning.com, right?
Right.
And it's located in Waltham, Mass.
Right.
They have a lovely office, an old clock building that was an old clock factory that's been converted. It's great to see old American kind of dead buildings come back to life. They used to make most of the clocks in the country, in the world, or wasn't some like huge fraction of the world's clocks were made in one.
It was an early mass producer of watches, and
not clocks, watches, yeah.
Right, and they made railroad watches, and there's a little museum in the building. You can find out all about it if you come to the Waltham Watch Factory. But it was the largest employer in Waltham. It employed 4,000 people in 1900, and Waltham is called the Watch City because it was the home of the Waltham Watch Company.
Right. So you start this company with how many people?
It was just me.
Just you.
It was just me.
And how did you get off the ground?
I had, because I'd done so much consulting, I had a lot of people whose contact information I had. I think I had 1,500 people in my Rolodex at the time. And I started sending out emails saying I was doing this. And at the time, the whole premise of the business was that I was going to help people save money on their mutual fund expenses by moving them from actively managed funds to index funds. That was the basic idea. And but I sent this, I don't know if I called it a newsletter or not, but I was sending it out once a month. And about 6 months into it, and I was starting up, so I had to buy a computer, and there were decisions to make.
So you had a little office, or you were just?
I had in retrospect, now I think I would just start from home, but then I had an office in a shared facility, something like WeWork or
Right.
HQ Global or Regis. And so I went in every day, and it was kind of exciting. But I sent this newsletter out, and eventually people began to contact me. And I think I got my first money management client a little less than a year after I started. And then it just kind of, mushroomed. And by October of 2003, I wasn't charging enough. So lots of people were really, really interested to have me help them. And I had too much work. I couldn't do it all. And I was fortunate. I had the severance package I got from Scudder, so that was kind of keeping me afloat. And it just kind of grew. And
today you have how many employees?
We're at 17 people.
17. That's
Right.
great success. And
we're very fortunate to get this far.
yeah. Well, and I've been visiting Rick and his employees for years, and really dedicated, smart, well trained folks. And so you decided to go the route of economic space planning.
Right.
How did that?
Well,
how has that worked for you?
It's okay. So, I mean, first of all, I was really, the fact that it was economics based really did appeal. And I think that it was very helpful at the beginning, because I first of all, I'll say that I spent like a whole month trying to figure out how it worked and trying to understand how it worked. And I got to the point where I could explain it to people. And I think that was valuable, and put together kind of a standard story for to explain to clients what it was saying to them, what the messages were to them. And so that for me, what was really interesting was I had become persuaded that it was really important to do a financial plan before giving investment advice. So I was doing that, and kind of 3 or 4 years, but I was really focused on the investment management, and I saw financial planning as a very technical business. It was all about getting the right portfolio for people and then just managing that portfolio for them. And that was really where the value was, I thought. And 2, 3, 4 years in, people began to call clients, and they'd say, "So how are we doing?" And I'd say, "Oh, we're doing great. We just, like I said, we moved you to index funds. We've saved you all this money. We're matching market performance." And they'd say, "Well, but that's not what I mean. You did a financial plan for us. How are we doing against the financial plan? Are we on track?" And I the first few times it was, "Well, I don't know. Come on in, we'll look," right? But I began to realize that was what most people really cared about. Most people came to a financial advisor, and they might have thought that it was about investment management, because most people still, when you say financial planning to them, they think investment management. But my experience is quite different. my experience is that people really are concerned about, will I have enough money to retire? Can I buy a bigger house? Can I send my kids to college? And how does that all fit together?
What happens
And
if we get divorced?
well, people don't usually ask that, but
Yeah.
that does happen.
Right.
And so that really transformed the business, because we began to really focus on the people's progress against their financial plan and updating their financial plan. And
Just so, because not everybody's that kind of versed in economics versus conventional planning, how would you characterize the difference to, since you, well, I mean, I could do it, but
yeah, I think that
from you.
my sense of it is that it's I mean, first of all, it's solving the problem as an economist would solve it, which means that financial planning is an example of what's called a dynamic programming problem, where the decisions that you make today influence the choices that you have tomorrow, and the choices and the decisions you make tomorrow influence the choices that you have the next year. And so the right way to solve that problem is, in effect, to go to the end and work back. So you go to the end and you say, given the choices that I have for the last year of my life, what decision would I make? And then you can in effect value, based on that, you can value the choices that you have at that last year, and then you can work backward, so that at the point where we're advising people, we're kind of valuing the choices that they can make now.
Taking all everything that may happen in the future. Yeah,
that's right. And so, and people, and the sort of more traditional approach is not doing that, and it's advising people fundamentally based on the assets, the probability of various asset levels at the end of life. And that's not the way that most people think about.
So life. I guess I would, supplement what you're just saying by saying economics is trying to solve the problem of a squirrel. A squirrel has to gather acorns in when it's not winter, spring, summer, fall, so that they can keep consuming at the same level inside their nest in the tree in the winter and not starve. So the idea of just trying to have a smooth living standard, not just in the winter versus the summer and the other months, but when you're young and working versus when you're retired. That's the basic thing of economics, and do it within your resources, not pretend that you can spend at some level that you would like to spend independent of what you can afford to spend. So it's kind of like starting with what you can afford, a lifetime budget.
Well, there is that too, but I think it is not the traditional approach, but the approach that many advisors use, which is that sort of goal-based approach.
Right.
They're also planning not to run out of money, but that approach places more. I think it provides clients with a lot less information than the economics
The problem
approach
is that the goal is being set initially. So in our, as you know, with our software, we don't ask anybody about their goal, because my goal for retirement spending would be $1 billion a day, which is obviously completely infeasible. Your goal should be a smooth living standard, and that's really dictated by your resources, which can, be adjusted. You can work longer and have more resources, but for any business, let's say, decision about how long you're going to work and what you've got in assets, and forgetting, and assuming some conservative return on your assets, it's really a matter of sophisticated arithmetic, but sophisticated arithmetic, because it's not an easy calculation. It has to be done taking into account all the taxes and the interaction of everything, what we call simultaneity, but there is a finite answer to how you can have the same number of acorns every year through the rest of your life.
That's true, but I would also say, Larry, that we have some clients who don't find the idea of smoothing to be consistent with what they're trying to do. But we can still, if we can get them to describe what they're trying to do, we can still use the software. Well, one person that I can think of had a goal of a certain living standard that was somewhat different than what they were doing. Right. But we were able to get to that and say, well, here are 3 different ways you could get there.
Here you have to work this many more years.
Right.
You have to give up on the boat.
Right.
You have to, downsize your home.
Right.
That's all within the software's capacity to figure out. Yeah.
That's right. But then there was another one who said, well, we really want to live high on, we want to do a lot while the kids are at home. That's really important to us. And if our living standard drops afterwards, that's okay. Tell us how much it's going to drop. And we can do that. Right. And that is also helpful.
Yeah.
And neither of those things, I think, especially the second one, is very difficult, if not impossible, to do with a sort of goal-based approach.
Yeah. And our software lets you set whatever pattern. You don't necessarily you can say, I'd like to have fewer acorns as I'm older. I gradually have my acorn consumption decline because I'm getting thinner anyway. And the program will match your profile.
That's right.
The main thing is that you're always within your lifetime budget, and your lifetime budget, of course, is elastic to what you decide to do.
And one other thing that I would say that it allows you to do that I think is very valuable, it allows you to see the trade-offs between things like a larger house, which is what we would call in economics a stock expenditure. It's a lump sum expenditure. It's difficult to translate into annual spend, right? Against an annual spend. So I can have a lot bigger house, or I could take more expensive vacations, and we can give you the precise trade-off between those two things.
Right.
And that's very helpful. And it's very difficult to do that, if not impossible to do that with the goal-based approach.
Yeah, I think anything in economics can be priced. I would say that economists can price love. Think about having another baby. This is extreme. This is extreme, right? This is very Chicago.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think that we can, for an individual client, we can tell people our estimates of the financial costs of various decisions, and then they can decide whether it's worth it to them or not. And I suppose it would be true, and it is true. This is what the Becker and company were trying to do, right? They would look at large amounts of data, and they could impute a value, right, to various decisions that people make, various personal decisions that people make.
Yeah, let me put it this way. Rather than saying that we can put a price on a new child, you could certainly say, can I afford this additional child? I have 3 already. We'd love to have a 4th, but it would require my giving up my job for 6 months, or getting an au pair, or just getting a living there. What are all the costs? Yeah.
Although I will say, and this was an early client that we had, was somewhat atypical for us, and but it was a real learning experience for me. They were atypical in the sense that they were. I think that they had lower earnings than our typical client today does, and but they had also they were both working in fields where they had access to pensions, significant pensions, and um, I was trying to price out, they were trying to think about how many kids they were going to have. And I was trying to price out, every kid is going to cost you so much for college and so much for, and they said, no, you don't understand. We want to have a large family, and the kids will, if they're going to go to college, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out how to fund it, and they'll get scholarships, and they don't have to go to Harvard. They can go to UMass or UMass Lowell or a community college, and I said, well, here's the expenses for all the clothes. And they said, well, we're not going to spend any money on clothes. The kids that have aunts and uncles, we're going to use clothes from our family. And so there are many ways to do things and to have sort of the life that you envision. And so that this financial planning capability that we have is helpful, but it's just a tool.
Yeah, I would say by analogy, everybody has different choice. When they go to the grocery store, everybody has different preferences about what, for any given $100, what they actually put into the cart, but they get to see the prices when you go to the grocery store. Our tool can show the prices, and then people can choose what they want, which is, tell me though, let's move to away from kind of the general differences between conventional and economics-based planning, but to your clients, to the kind of range of behaviors you're seeing. Are your clients coming to you in desperation because they have failed to plan for years and now they're broke and they just need Rick's salvation? Or have they kind of said, we just need better planning? Are they sticking to their plan? Are they so there's questions about your clients, but there's also about all the clients who don't come to you, all the people that don't do planning, and where that's coming from. Because we've been trying to sell our software directly to the public for years, and we find some reluctance. There are a pretty good segment of do-it-yourselfers. Then there are people that want to do it with a Rick Miller, but then there's other people who are just driving blind. They just do not want to think about it, even though the software, this particular software, can actually make them money because it can get them more Social Security benefits, lower their taxes, let them sleep at night. Where do you see human psychology and all this? What's your experience been? 20 years ago?
Larry, we both have a problem, right? We don't see the whole population. We see the people who come to us, right? So there's selected samples, right. And they're self-selected. And so the people who come to us, by and large, are people who see value in planning, who see value in thinking carefully about how they use their money. And I have no idea what proportion of the population that is. I think it's kind of difficult to know. In that group, we certainly see people who who run the gamut from spending much less than they can afford, mm-hmm. and being very concerned that even though we tell them they have plenty that they don't or that they won't, to the other extreme of people who are really pushing the limits of their spending capacity, and who are often spending more than we would advise them to spend.
And do those people adjust do they take that message okay? And
they certainly take the message, and some adjust and some don't. And boy, the sample size is really small. It's in the scheme of things, it's very small. But we do have a lot of people who take our advice, who say, well, I'd like to do X and Y. And we say, well, then we think you should work a little longer. And they will work a little longer. Who say, well, I'd really like to spend X on a house. And we say, we think that's too much. We think you could spend 3/4 of X on a house. That would be better. And then they'll spend maybe 0.8, right? So 3/4 would be 0.75, and but they won't spend the whole amount that they were thinking of spending. So I think that people do take our advice. I mean, and partly I think it's they're paying for advice, and they want it. They want to know what we think, and they will modify their behavior to move in the direction of what we're recommending.
So Rick, we know from studies. I've done some of these studies. Alicia Manell of Boston College and other researchers have looked at the adequacy of saving. We look at there's data on how much in the survey of consumer finances that the Federal Reserve does every 3 years, how much wealth people are bringing into retirement. And the baby boomers have a typical amount of wealth, like a median level of wealth, which is about 3 years of median consumption in the country. So, and they're typically retired by 65, so they could live to 100. They've got enough money to cover 3 years of the next 35, if they make it for 35 years. So there seems to be, in general, dramatic undersaving. If you look at
so when you say that, you're saying that on top of Social Security, that they've got 3 years of margin.
Yeah, and they have, basically relatively few have defined benefit pensions anymore,
Right.
unless they work for state and government and local government. But if they do, then their Social Security benefits.
So that's not our client, right? And I think from that perspective, then it's clear that we have a biased sample, because our clients typically have substantially more than that, substantially more than 3 years of excess on Social Security.
Question: whether you might have, let's say, a high wage client, and they're in maybe they're like a Boston University professor, and we have a pretty generous, compared to other places, retirement account system program where the university is contributing. I guess it's like, a pretty good contribution. And then there's also Social Security. And I think a lot of people think, well, the government plus the university or my employer, that's going to be enough. And I don't need to save on top of that. But my realization from looking at running lots of people through our software is that that's not at all the case. That even though it may seem like a combination of Social Security and retirement account assets is enough, that people should be, because of the potential to live to a very long age, and because of all the taxes, that people probably need to be saving typically 10, 15%, maybe even 20% of their after tax take-home wages. And that we're not seeing that at all. Basically, people aren't saving anything beyond what the employer and Social Security is doing for them. I think I can't say that's, that was a strong statement. I'll take it back.
I think it's important.
People I think are doing that, are engaged in that kind of behavior. These folks have figured it out. They're taking care of me. Clearly, I'm going to be okay. And by the way, I can retire when my buddies retire. When I decide I've had it with my boss, I've worked long enough, I'm going to retire. I'm out of here, and I'm off to the golf course. And they're not even thinking about, can they actually make it? And by the way, I'm also going to die on time. I'm going to die at my life expectancy, because Social Security keeps telling me about my life expectancy on their website. So therefore, I don't have to worry about living to 100. and eating cat food? Respond.
Boy, there are a lot of things to respond to in there. The first thing I would say is that, as you know, that the fraction of earnings that Social Security replaces declines as earnings rise. So for people with very low earnings, Social Security may very well be enough or very close to enough. Whereas for people with high earnings, Social Security is a long way short. So that's the first thing I would say.
Plus, it's also subject to taxation, which is getting bigger. The degree is getting
that's also true. But I think that just looking at the replacement ratio by itself, without even thinking about taxes, you see that, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, in general, and I would say this, even though our clients are people who plan or who are disposed to plan, they're not thinking about it the way an economist would think about it. And they do have the notion that, they do subscribe to the notion that when Congress set up the contribution limits, that Congress was thinking about them, and that if they just follow the limits, if they save the limits, that'll be enough. And in some cases, it's too much. And we've had clients who've put themselves into difficult cash flow situations because they've been putting the maximum possible into their 401k. And not only are they getting the maximum match from their employer, but they're putting a lot in. And then they come to us and we say, well, you've got plenty saved. And they say, well, now we want to fund college for our kids. But there's no cash because it's all in the 401k. And they've got more there than they need. Or that they've saved a lot in the 401k, but it's not enough because they're at the high end of their earnings range, and that the amount that's saved in the 401k isn't sufficient. So we see all of that, and people do not plan that way, and they don't. Most people don't, when they think about things like, well, when they're going to retire, they say, well, I'm tired, I'm done, right? And they don't think about, well, will there be enough? It's just not.
Yeah,
it's kind of a surprise to them when we say, well, it would be better if you could work longer, right? Because you're short.
So one comment on what you're just saying here is that for everybody to kind of focus on, we have this incredible edifice of like 20 different government-sponsored or government-initiated retirement account systems, IRA, SEPs, SRAs, 427, but I forget.
457.
457 plans, 401k plans, 403b plans,
401a.
401a. It just goes on. And every employer gets to become in effect, your financial father, because they get to set how much they're going to contribute, how much you can contribute, what you can invest in. The idea that we're turning over, that the government, Uncle Sam, for decades now, has turned over to 35 million employers, not all of whom have plans, but millions have plans, that they're now the people that should be deciding how much we should be saving, or on a tax favored basis, Roth versus non-Roth plans too, and what investment opportunities we should have. I mean, this is really outrageous that this was turned over to completely untrained folks who.
Well, Larry, on the other hand, and I'm not an expert on the history of retirement plans, but before, let's say, the 1870s, there were no retirement plans. And then you began to get pensions for Civil War soldiers. And then the American Express Company had a pension plan. But I don't know that I don't know that the American Express company was thinking about anything other than, well, we'd like our retirees to have a certain amount every year. Whether that was enough, who knew, right? So I think that we may tend to look at the age of defined benefit pensions as a golden age, if you will. But I think a lot of people didn't have any pensions at that time.
It's good we have something, but I think the government massively messed it up by putting this in the hands of employers, but they did. And it's good that we have some,
Well, no, time out.
But-
If the employers started these plans, the government didn't start the plans for private employees. So private employees had plans because their employers created them.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the government really got this rolling by giving tax breaks. And that was probably partly, to get votes from unions, because there were union plans. There are still union defined benefit plans. But here's the thing. You have this enormous heterogeneity of these plans. And if people think, well, I've got a plan and I am actually participating, not everybody does participate or participate fully, but the ones who do, they say, well, I've got a plan, that's fine. I'm going to retire at this age. I don't need to think about it. Not at all the case, because there's so much heterogeneity in the design of these plans that everybody really needs to realize that they have to look at this carefully, because they could randomly be put in plan X or plans, whatever.
Right. But I'm an economist too, or at least was once, and I'm not persuaded that the Congress is a particularly good play. They're not particularly well positioned to make decisions about how Americans ought to save for retirement. And
no, I wouldn't say. I'm not saying that the alternative would have been for congressmen. That's a kind of a subject for a different day. But I think what they have set up is a disaster with this retirement account system, and in large part it's a disaster because they haven't told people. We've given people that have no background in finances the ability to decide how much to help you save taxes. We've in effect let them decide how much taxes you have to pay. You get to pay over your lifetime or have to pay over your lifetime. We give them in effect taxing authority or tax saving authority. And by the way, don't pay any attention. Don't necessarily think that they've set up a plan that's adequate for you. It might be overly adequate, but could well be under saving for you. And you got to go beyond what your employer's doing and what Social Security is doing, and look at this yourself. You cannot count on Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam's not your friend, and your employer's not your friend or your father or your mother. You are your father and your mother. You've got to take care of yourself.
Well, but Larry, this is the American system, right? We let people who are not trained in family economics or any sort of family disciplines. We let them decide who to marry by themselves. We let them decide what kind of car they want to buy. We let them decide what company they're going to work for, what job they're going to take, what pay they're going to accept. I mean, and
yeah, but when you buy a car, you know that that there are some regulations, okay, that there's an annual inspection, that you're being given some warning, as opposed to when you join your company's 401k, nobody's warning you that this may not be enough, that this may.
Well, but nobody warns you that I would say that if you're buying cars, right, and you want comparisons for cars, the government's not providing those. You can get them from Consumer Reports, or you can get them from your friends, right?
I know.
I still
think there's got to be an explanation for why so many people are showing up with so little. I'm not talking about your clients, but just across the board, we have completely screwed this up.
I think I would say that that's human psychology. right? That's human psychology.
But it might be
And
over reliance on these institutions that nobody said aren't adequate, because they haven't gone out of their way to say, this is just the basics. You have to go beyond that, because that's not a message that Wall Street wants to deliver in general to the public, which is you need to save more. It's you need to invest better with us. It's not you need to save more. You don't sacrifice. We're going to magically fix things for you without any. And you're obviously not Wall Street. You're anti-Wall Street in that context.
well, I think that the incentives are different, and that's true in many areas of life. And I think getting philosophical here may not. Again, this is probably another discussion for another time.
Yeah.
But I do think it is true that human beings have difficulty planning for the future. It's hard. It's really hard to do. It's not a natural thing to plan 30 years from now. It's hard to do that, and it's hard to imagine that. And my sense is that, although I've not looked carefully at the literature, my sense is that people who've studied it find that's true, find that people have trouble thinking about the future and have a lot of trouble understanding risk and understanding investment risk. And that's just if you will, a flaw in our design.
I would say, my take is that the majority, with the exception of the software I've developed, there's no economic space planning tools out there. So then you're talking about people having a big terrible problem, very, very complicated, basically using tools that aren't up to snuff to deal with it. And then people being very afraid to begin with, in the context of lots of people are, not everybody, but lots of people are very, very nervous they think it's a trip to the dentist as opposed to a way to get their life together and be able to sleep at night, and maybe potentially dramatically lower their taxes, raise their benefits, dealing with Social Security correctly. And then you've got on top of that Social Security and the retirement account system giving people somehow the assurance that that's going to be enough. And then you've got people superstitious about thinking of living to 100 because they figure if they really think about that, they're going to die the next minute. So they focus on dying on time, which is, I think, a huge danger. So we've got all these things going on, and then just people without self-control as well. So anyway, I would say, to sum up, we basically have a huge saving problem in our country, financial management problem of households are facing major problems in this area as a group. Not everybody, but far too many are saving too little, investing poorly, and need Rick Miller's help.
Well, but I think, just I don't want to go too far on this, but you could be talking about pension plans, Larry, right? They're underfunded. They're not fully understanding the implications of the investment risk that they're taking, and in theory they're professionals.
Everywhere there's financial malfeasance, it's throughout the entire country. At the government level, the federal government level, the state government level, the companies themselves were underfunded, and that's the private companies, corporations like IBM were underfunded, and that's why they shut them down, their pensions down, and really reneged on contracts, implicit contracts to their workers. You keep working for us, we'll pay you a little bit now, but when you're older, you're going to
So
get this
you're,
accrual of your pension that's going to be really high. And that's why you should keep working. And gee, oh, sorry, we can't afford this anymore. We're just going to cut it off right now and just pay you the accrued benefits and not let you accrue these high pension benefits later in the next 10 years. That's what they did
so
with IBM.
So I would say you're sort of making my point, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you look at. Humans have a hard time with this, and I think that the what gives me hope here is that people are looking for financial advice, and the financial advisory business is recognizing the need for that people need more than and want more than just investment advice. And so this is something that we're seeing in the financial planning profession, that customers, clients are not satisfied with just investment advice. It sort of goes back to what I said when we first started talking about Sensible Financial, and how clients were calling and saying, so how are we doing, right? How are we doing against this financial plan? So people do like, or at least the clients that we have do like the structure that comes from having a lifetime financial plan. Yep. And that comes from thinking about the possibility of living past their life expectancy and how they would fund that. People find that helpful. And and I am encouraged by the fact that advisors are getting that message and are moving in the direction of giving more complete advice that goes beyond just how people should invest.
So let me, Rick, I want to thank you so much for coming on, and let me make two plugs at the end here as we say goodbye. So one is a plug for your company. If you want to have a fantastic advisor and colleagues to guide you through your financial future, Sensible Financial Planning, it uses MaxiFi.com, MaxiFi Planner, my company's software, has for 20 years. And Rick also manages money, so we'll help you with your investing. And that's the way to go. If you're more of a do-it-yourselfer, we have this tool, which is MaxiFi Planner, MaxiFi.com, MaxiFi.com. You can get the software, get a license in 2 seconds, run it online, and see for yourself what needs to be done. So there's some people that want to, do it themselves. There's some people that want to do it with an experienced, terrific PhD economist, Rick Miller. So thanks again, and we will be talking for the next 40 years, I'm sure. Okay.
Thanks so much for having me on, Larry.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.